What if I told you the moment you defend yourself, you've already lost control, not just of the argument, not just of your image, but of the entire psychological battlefield? Every time you explain, justify, clarify, you're not fixing your reputation. You're handing over your power. You're telling the world, I need you to believe me. I need you to approve of me. And just like that, you've slipped out of command. You've entered the most dangerous territory a man can step into: the need to be understood. This is the trap. And the average person walks into it every single day. Someone throws shade, a subtle insult, a public accusation, and the knee-jerk response is always the same. Wait, that's not what I meant. That's not who I am. You misunderstood me. But that reflex, it's not noble. It's not honest. It's weakness wrapped in words. Because the second you defend yourself, you've accepted their frame. And in power games, he who controls the frame owns the outcome. Machiavelli understood this before modern psychology gave it a name. He knew that emotional control, not emotional expression, is the foundation of all dominance. He knew that the man who stays silent controls the temperature of the room, and he knew something most people will never dare admit: explaining yourself is not clarity, it's submission. So today we're not here to play defense. We're here to rewrite the rules, to install the Machiavellian mindset that makes people afraid to even question you. Because when you speak less but move with more presence, when you let others burn themselves trying to expose you, you don't just survive, you become untouchable. This is frame control at its most dangerous form, and it begins right now. What if I told you that every time you defend yourself, you're digging your own grave in public, not with a gun, not with a sword, but with words, harmless words, justifications, clarifications, explanations. The very things you were trained to use to clear the air, to protect your name, to set the record straight. But Machiavelli would look you dead in the eyes and tell you this: he who defends admits guilt. He who explains bows to judgment. And just like that, your reputation starts bleeding from the inside out. There's a moment, a split-second decision that decides everything. You're in a meeting, a social circle, a comment thread, a dinner table. Someone calls you arrogant, selfish, fake, cold. The energy shifts, heads turn, eyes land on you, and without thinking, you respond. That's not what I meant. You're taking it the wrong way. Let me explain. But that single impulse, that desperate reach for understanding, is the exact moment you hand over your power. Because the second you explain, you've already agreed to their rules. You're playing in their frame. And frame control is everything. This is psychological warfare. This is social survival. And you don't win by fighting fair. You win by becoming untouchable. Machiavellian silence isn't weakness. It's precision. It's dominance. It's presence. The kind of presence that makes the whole room second-guess what just happened. Because when someone throws a jab and you say, nothing, not a word, not a flinch, the air thickens. The tension rises. And suddenly people aren't watching the attacker anymore. They're watching you, wondering what you're thinking, wondering what you'll do next. And that is where power begins in the unknown. You see, people are trained to react. But leaders, true leaders, are trained to pause, to observe, to let the energy twist in the air like smoke and reveal who's really in control. And that's why defending yourself is the most subtle form of self-betrayal, because it shows you're emotionally invested in being understood rather than in being respected. In a world obsessed with being liked, the one who doesn't explain becomes feared. And fear, when it comes from silence, carries more weight than any speech ever could. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to dismantle the reflex to defend. We're going to break the addiction to clarity. And we're going to rebuild your presence from the ground up into something cold, controlled, and dangerous. Because the less you explain, the more they believe you're capable of anything. And that belief, that's where reputation becomes power. You've spent your whole life being told that speaking up is strength, that setting the record straight is honorable, that defending your name means defending your dignity. But what if that was a lie designed to make you predictable? What if every time you explained yourself, you were actually giving away your greatest leverage mystery? This is where frame control begins, not in what's being said, but in who reacts first. Because he who reacts is no longer leading. And most people don't realize that their reasonable explanations are actually emotional leaks. Desperate attempts to be understood. Subtle confessions that say, your opinion of me matters more than my own authority. Machiavellian silence isn't about being passive, it's about refusing to legitimize the attack. When someone throws a public jab and you meet it with explanation, you've just declared their judgment valid. You've stepped into their frame and allowed them to become the judge, the crowd, and the executioner. But what happens when you don't respond? That's when the air shifts. The attacker looks around for confirmation, for validation, for control, but the room stays still. And you say nothing. You breathe. You sit in your emotional sovereignty like it's a throne. Suddenly the power dynamic collapses, not because you fought back, but because you never gave them the reaction they needed to win. The silent man holds the room. Not the loudest, not the funniest, not the most agreeable. The one who can let the accusation hang in the air and die by its own weight. That's psychological dominance. Because power isn't just what you say. It's what others think you could say but choose not to. You've seen it before, that one guy in the meeting who doesn't rush to respond. The one at the dinner table who doesn't defend when mocked. The one online who never claps back. And somehow he still walks away with the most respect. Why? Because while others are trying to win moments, he's controlling perception. That's the shift. You stop trying to clear things up, and you start forcing people to draw their own conclusions. And trust me, when there's silence, the human brain fills in the gaps, and it usually overestimates the threat. The man who says nothing forces the world to narrate his power for him. That's the Machiavellian trick. You don't need to be feared, you just need to be unreadable. Because people don't attack what they don't understand. They hesitate. They recalculate. They submit. And this is just the beginning. There's a moment when silence stops being calm and starts becoming dangerous. You can feel it. The room tightens. The air gets heavier. And suddenly everyone's watching the wrong person. Not the one who made the accusation, but the one who said nothing. That's the moment the dynamic flips. And that's where Machiavellian strategy hits its sharpest edge. You don't just ignore the accusation, you weaponize it. You reflect it, redirect it, make them carry their own emotional baggage in front of everyone. And you do it without lifting a finger. Someone calls you arrogant. You glance past them unfazed. Strange how confidence makes people uncomfortable. They say you're manipulative, cool, calm. Only people who can't be influenced say that. They call you fake smile slightly, just enough to twist the tension. People always say that when they stop getting what they want. You don't defend, you invert. And now the accuser is trapped in their own projection. You didn't resist their weapon, you made them stab themselves with it. That's frame inversion. And it does something that explanations never could. It isolates them. Because now, instead of you scrambling to prove your innocence, they're scrambling to recover their image. Their jab didn't land. Their tone looks emotional. Their motive looks insecure. And the more they try to clarify, the more desperate they sound. The silent man becomes the black hole in the room, pulling all attention, all tension without saying a word. And now, they feel it. The panic. The shift. The fact that they're no longer the one in control. They're the one being studied. And what's more terrifying than attacking someone and watching them not react? Watching them not need to react. This is psychological reversal at its peak. They expected an argument, a performance, a collapse. What they got was stillness, presence, a mirror. And now they're the only one breaking down in front of everyone. That's what makes it dangerous. You're not winning the argument. You're making the crowd question the accuser. You're not proving yourself right. You're making the attacker look unstable, bitter, personal. Because the one who attacks and gets nothing in return always ends up looking like they care too much. And that's social suicide. You just turned weakness into aura. And the longer you stay still, the more they unravel piece by piece, word by word, excuse by excuse, until the whole room sees it. They lost, and you never even played. There's a silence so sharp it doesn't just stop conversation, it slices through the room like a blade. Not because you paused, not because you hesitated, but because you disappeared. And what's left behind isn't peace, it's paranoia. This is where things turn. Not with volume, not with violence, but with absence. Cold, calculated absence. The accusation is made. The energy surges. Everyone braces for impact. And then, nothing. No reply. No rebuttal. No explanation. You vanish, not blocked, not reactive, just gone. And suddenly the one who fired the shot is standing alone with the gun, and no one to shoot. You've just deployed the Machiavellian ghost tactic, and it's one of the most terrifying power plays in existence. Why? Because most people survive on emotional feedback. Even in conflict, they feed off resistance, off your anger, off your attempt to defend. But when you disappear, you don't just remove yourself, you remove the game. And they can't win a game that no longer exists. That's what bends the mind. That's what breaks the script. Because the brain is wired for resolution. But when there's no closure, people spiral. They start posting more, asking others, repeating their accusation, reaching for validation. They overexpose themselves emotionally, socially, publicly, while you remain a shadow. This isn't silence. This is psychological erasure. And to the attacker, it's unbearable. Because you didn't just ignore them. You made them irrelevant. That's the most painful truth no one is ready for. It's not being attacked that destroys most people. It's being ignored. And when someone insults you and you stay completely still in the void, it sends one devastating message. You are not worth my presence. That's not defense. That's domination. Not through aggression, but through emotional blackout. And here's the twist. The more they chase your reaction, the weaker they look. The more they try to drag you back into the frame, the more pathetic their efforts become. Because every attempt is proof that you still live in their head, while they no longer exist in yours. That imbalance. That's the real power. Absence isn't retreat. It's psychological warfare. It forces the other person to argue with a ghost, to punch at fog, to scream into silence that never echoes back. And while they crumble from overexposure, you become untouchable. Because now they look emotional, desperate, loud, and you look like a presence so complete, you don't even have to be in the room to dominate it. That's when you break them not in confrontation, but in the hollow space where their voice dies unanswered. They thought silence was weakness. They thought your lack of defense meant they were winning. But now, the room is too quiet. Everyone's watching, but not watching them. They're watching you, still, calm, untouched. And suddenly the narrative shifts without a word being spoken. This is the moment no one prepares for the social reversal. The attacker overplayed. The insult didn't land. The jab was too personal, too forced. And now the people watching start to feel it, something's off. You haven't said a thing, but somehow they look like the villain. Why? Because while they were trying to win attention, you were commanding aura. And in that aura lives something more powerful than argument doubt. Doubt in their tone, doubt in their motive, doubt in their emotional control. And people don't rally behind the loudest voice, they rally behind the one who doesn't flinch. That's how power shifts, not with dominance, with poise. And now, something strange begins to happen. The crowd starts doing what you never did. They begin to defend you. She didn't deserve that. He's just sitting there. Why keep going at him? Damn, that was uncalled for. And just like that, you flipped the trial without lifting a finger. You didn't defend your name. The crowd did it for you. This is Machiavellian image control. It's not about fixing your reputation. It's about engineering the perception that you never needed to. Because when you don't fight for your image, people assume it must already be unshakable. You become larger in their minds, not because you fought harder, but because you didn't fight at all. And here's the part that sticks, the part that lives rent-free in their heads long after the moment ends. You never flinched. You never blinked. You never explained. And yet, you won. That kind of power leaves a residue, an emotional aftershock. It lingers. It echoes. It changes how people approach you next time, with caution, with calculation, with silence of their own. Because now they're not just afraid of insulting you. They're afraid of what your silence might expose in them. You didn't just destroy the insult. You destroyed the idea that you could be rattled. And in a world full of noise performance and public panic, that kind of stillness is terrifying. That's the legacy of silence. Not just in the moment, but in the afterimage that keeps replaying in everyone's mind long after you've left the room. And that is where real fear is born. There comes a point where you stop defending, stop reacting, stop retreating, because you no longer need to. You've crossed a line, a psychological threshold, and from that point on, your presence becomes your defense. You don't have to win arguments. Your silence wins rooms. People start adjusting their tone when you're around. They think twice before joking at your expense. They hesitate before speaking your name. Not because you said anything, but because you didn't. That's when it begins. The final evolution. You stop being a person who responds and become a presence that commands. You don't clarify, you don't counter, you don't explain. You exist, and that alone reshapes the atmosphere. That's not charisma. That's aura. And aura can't be forced. It's built in the fire of restraint. While others scream for attention, you build power in the silence. While they post, argue, defend, justify, you disappear, then reappear without warning. And when you return, no one dares challenge you. Because now you're not just respected. You're studied, watched, feared not for what you've done, but for what you might do if ever provoked. That's Machiavellian control. Not dominance through noise, but through anticipation. Power isn't loud. It's quiet and undeniable. It's the energy people feel when you walk in and say nothing, and yet the entire room shifts around you. It's the gravity you carry that forces others to orbit your stillness. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how far you'll go. They only know you're not to be underestimated, because you've made unpredictability your shield, unreadability your strategy, and silence your weapon. The old you needed to prove things. The evolved you let the world wonder. You're no longer playing by the social script. You've become the glitch, the anomaly, the man people can't decode, and that makes you dangerous. Not because you threaten, but because you don't have to. Not because you win fights, but because no one wants to fight you anymore. You've become a myth without explanation, a mirror without reflection, a presence that haunts the room long after you've gone. And all of it, every ounce of power, came from the moment you refused to explain. There's a level of presence where you no longer need to defend anything because you've defined everything. You don't correct the narrative. You are the narrative. You don't control the room. The room adjusts to you. And the reason you stopped chasing clarity, you stopped explaining your tone, you stopped reacting to opinions. You chose silence not to hide, but to ascend. Because every time you don't explain yourself, you're telling the world, I'm not here to be understood. I'm here to be respected. That's the final shift from defense to definition. You're no longer answering to their framework. You've become your own framework. And in doing so, you've broken the cycle, that exhausting loop of explaining, proving, apologizing, clarifying. You don't do that anymore. You hold still, and the world reshapes itself around your stillness. That's psychological sovereignty. That's Machiavellian power. Because once people realize they can't shake you, not with insults, not with gossip, not with pressure, they stop trying to move you and start moving around you. That's when you win without saying a word. That's when silence becomes not just a strategy, but a status. And here's the cold truth. The more you explain, the more alone you look. Because no one feels the need to step in when you're already arguing your own case. But when you stay silent, people begin to speak for you. They defend you They question your critics. They build stories about you. And that's when you become something far more powerful than understood. You become untouchable. And what's more haunting than a man who never needed to fight but still won? What lingers longer than a presence that never had to raise its voice? A legend born in silence. A myth carved out of non-response. A standard so unshakable no one dares question it because it never had to explain itself to begin with. You've left the court of public approval. You don't sit in their jury. You don't beg for their verdict. You became the judge of your own identity, and that's what they'll remember. Not what you said, but what you refused to say. Not how loud you were, but how your silence echoed louder than any scream. And now you don't live in defense. You live in definition. And that is how power becomes effortless. You were raised to believe that being understood was the goal, that if you just explained enough, people would finally get you, that the truth would defend itself, but it never does. Because in a world ruled by perception, truth is irrelevant. What matters is control. And now you see it clearly. Every moment you explain, you surrender. Every time you defend, you shrink. But the man who refuses to explain, he forces the world to reckon with his silence, and that silence becomes his legend. So if you've ever felt exhausted from being misread, if you've ever watched people twist your words, if you've ever defended yourself only to feel more misunderstood, then stop. Let it go. Let them talk. Let them twist. Let them underestimate. And while they chase attention, you build aura. While they react, you define. Because the man who answers to no one doesn't need to be understood. He needs to be respected. Now, if this video hit something real in you, drop a comment below and tell me, what's one moment you realized silence was more powerful than speaking? I read everyone. Save this video. Watch it again when you feel yourself slipping into defense. Share it with someone who keeps fighting battles they were never supposed to enter. And if you want more power like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This isn't just content. It's armor. And remember, you don't earn respect by proving you're right. You earn it by being someone who doesn't need to prove anything. That's power. That's sovereignty. And that is the Machiavellian way.